Welcome back, everyone. I'm Jason and you're watching Jason Jensen Trains. Well, in today's episode, I'm going to attempt something I've never tried before. I'm going to try to put railroad tracks in concrete. And we're going to make the entire project out of styrofoam. Well, it should be pretty interesting, so let's get to it. All right, the first thing we have to do is remove these buildings. I'm trying to decide where I want the concrete. So that road comes around. I'm gonna have to think about that. Okay, now with these, we need to mark. Okay, first let's mark these. Sorry, I don't really have a plan. I'm just kind of winging it. I'm going to have to cut some more squares to fill in the holes. Now, we don't need to go... The pink, I don't want to waste the pink styrofoam, so it's not going to go all the way back. Okay, so the next thing we have to do is cut strips of pink foam. And we just have to make sure that they're this thick. This thickness is from the base of the foam to the top of the rail. The first thing that we have to do is put some thin liquid nails down and then pin this track so that it's glued down, because right now it's just sitting there. Okay, so we're just simply using liquid nails. And I have an old saw blade. Okay, and then I'll just take a few nails and pin it down just to make sure that it stays down and doesn't move. Right, there, I've got 3 nails in it. Now we'll do the same on this. And I'm just lightly dragging this saw blade over it. And it gives it a texture, something for the ties to stick to. Now I marked it with a Sharpie on both sides so I knew exactly where it would go. Make sure if there's any little joints that they are pressed together and line up perfectly. Okay, now we'll let that dry and we'll go over and start cutting our pink styrofoam. I wanted to quick mention that when I'm cutting my rail, I stagger my joints. So let me see. I can't even find one. Okay, so I've got one back here and then here. So what is that, 2 inches, 2.5 inches. I have a video called Laying Track on a Curve. Go back and watch that video and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. So the joints are staggered. This rail's cut here and then this rail's cut here rather than cutting straight across. And then you subtract the ties from one piece and leave the ties on the other piece and then slide the rail into all of the little tie plates and nails that are on there. And it just makes for such a nice, smooth, clean curve. Your track will never kink. So I just wanted to mention that quick. So go ahead and check out that video I think it's called How to Lay Track on a Curve. All right, this is exciting. Mail call. Okay, this is the crane for the section that we're working on right now. Hopefully you can see that good. Okay, this is exciting. N scale for background kits. Again, N scale. So on each of these, what I'm going to do is I'll put together one flat wall section and then lay that on the scanner of my computer and scan it in. That way I can build structures. I can make them as tall as I want. I can make them as wide as I want. So for instance, if I scan that wall right there, or even that end wall, I can cut and paste them in my computer and make this as long as I want. Again, these are for the background on the layout, so very exciting. All right, let's get back to our project. Now in theory, this is what we're going to do. We're going to take the strips press it right onto the rails. That way we know we'll cut out that center piece, and then we have to cut a bevel for those ties. Now you could, if you're doing this project at home, maybe on a smaller scale, the area maybe is smaller on your layout, you could go this direction. And maybe take a wooden dowel and roll it over it if that's easier for you. And then we'll just cut that out. And that center part's going to be trash because we have to actually go thinner for the center section because you're gluing it on top of the ties, where this is going next to the tie, so it has to be thicker. So we'll throw that away, and then later we'll come back and cut thinner pieces that go down the center. Now I wanted to point out, while cutting this thin stuff, I've had my heat at 1.5. This knob here goes from 1 to 6, and that controls your heat for two reasons. The first reason is based on how thick your foam is. On a piece like this, you're going to want to turn it up to 3, maybe even 4, depending on the thickness. The second reason is if you have your heat really low, I'll show you. Right now it's on 1.5. And you see, you get a really fine cut. Now let's turn this up to Let's do 3.5. And we'll move this over so you have a comparison. You see the difference? So with lower heat, you get a finer cut, which allows you to get exact measurements. Now, I don't really like cutting stuff that's longer than the table, because you can get a really fine cut. Because you don't have to stop and rehandle it, and I'll show you quick. So if you push this through and just go slow, for this thickness I would probably be on 2.5, 3. You would get one nice solid cut. Now if it's long, say you run this through to get a thin piece, if you're running it through and you have to stop and move your hand back so that you can push more through, when you stop, you get a line. So if you have to stop 2 or 3 times, you're going to continue getting lines in it. So I always think it's better just to go with shorter pieces, but sometimes you do need a really long piece, so you just have to try to do your best at pushing it through very slow and steady without stopping. But experiment with your heat. You know, like any tool or anything that you do, it takes practice. You're not going to just buy this tool and just start cutting right away and have everything come out perfect. Getting familiar with your heat control and really learning how to use it and practice, you're going to get really good results. This is an incredible investment. I highly recommend it. Let me turn this off. Real quick, let me just go over this for those of you that don't have this. Simple. On and off. You have your heat control. And then you have this knob, which is for tightening and loosening the wire. I've had this for years, and I think I've only snapped the wire 3 times. And the first time was me not understanding how it works, and I just snapped it right away. Now, if it does snap, very simple. What I do is pull it out and I cut the end of it so it's a nice clean cut end, okay? And then hold it there so that you have your length. Then loosen this, and from up top, pull that out about a 1/2 inch to 1 inch. That's all. Then tighten this. Then put it through the hole, and you want it to stick out a little bit from the bottom, just a little bit. Then when it's sticking through, then tighten this. Now you want to have it really nice and tight, so then loosen this again at the top and turn that spool back until that wire's tight. It doesn't have to be super tight because you don't want to snap it. And then tighten it again. That's it. It's very simple. Now, the spool of wire that they give you, this for me will last me a lifetime. I don't think I'll ever have to replace this spool. If you're breaking this wire all the time, then you're not adjusting your heat properly. You either have the heat too low for the thickness of your foam, or you're applying way too much pressure and trying to force the piece through and it'll snap. So adjust your heat properly, and then take your time and go really slow and just guide it through. That's about it. Like I said, this is an awesome machine. I love it and I use it all the time. Now I take my straight blade and carefully cut. Oh, I cut the wrong one. I cut the outside one. Oh well. Okay, now I'll take it over and make sure it's the right shape. It fit perfectly. Okay, now, so that the ties go under it, you want to take a scrap piece that has no rail on it. And we're going to put our blade on it like that. So at the bottom, the corner's sticking out like that. And this back here is resting up against one of the tie plates. So it kind of holds it. Now you could glue a blade to a scrap piece. That would probably work the best. Then make sure that it's perfectly flat. Make sure you're on a flat surface. Now this part's kind of tricky. You just want to be careful that you don't cut all the way through. With my middle finger, I rest that on the outside. We'll do the same on this side. Now sometimes you'll cut through, you'll tear it. I have a pile over here where some that I've messed up. So, all right, let's take this over and see how it looks. And it fits perfectly. It's solid, they sit flat. Now we'll just keep doing that. We'll fill this in and then fill in the rest. Okay, next we need to remove all of this pink foam, but we need to lay it on here exactly how it goes, just like a big puzzle. Then we need to take the airbrush and paint the inside of the rails a rust color. Then after that dries, we need to cut some thin foam that goes down the center in between the rails. And then we need to paint that a concrete color and get that glued in place. Then we'll get all of this glued back on here in place, and then we can paint it. This is turning into a much bigger project than what I thought. You know, I wanted to point out too that you'll notice there's smaller squares up here in front and then bigger squares in back, and I want to make it look like the concrete was poured at two different times. Maybe it all cracked and busted up back here and they had to replace it all, or maybe this concrete in front is so old that at one time there was no rail behind it, and then maybe they had to bust out some They laid all the rail and then poured new concrete back here. You know, who knows what the story is, but I want to make it look like there's two different types of concrete. Okay, we're using old rust. And I think I'll put a drop, just a teeny drop of thinner, just to make it last a little longer. Now I did shoot just a misting of primer, a gray primer on it that's also by Ammo. Now we're going to use earth brown. You can hear that metal ball in there. It really doesn't take that much. We'll just add a little drop. Two tiny drops. Okay, now we're just going to do a misting here and there of this. Now I'll quick take this over to the workbench and run some thinner through it and clean it out quick. And then we'll come back and clean off the top of the rails. Okay, now we're cleaning off the top of the rail. And really what I have found is to press down and use your fingernail. All right, let's run an engine over it to test it. Okay, next we need to cut thin styrofoam that goes down the center in between the rails, and then we'll get that painted a gray concrete color and get that glued in. You know, I'm not sure why I masked all this off. Habit, I guess, from, you know, most of the time I mask things before I paint. But this was all water-based paint. It wouldn't have affected the styrofoam, so I wouldn't have needed to mask all this, but oh well. Hey, I almost forgot to pull our nails after we glued the track down to keep it in place. You know, real quick, I want to talk about cleaning the track. I showed how I use my fingernail, and I never run anything abrasive over my rails. I feel like if you use anything that slightly scratches it, those scratches will collect dirt and dust, especially if you have dirt on the wheels of your rolling stock or engine. Any little scratches on here, that dust is going to collect, and then your trains are not going to run smooth. Okay, so next we're going to cut some styrofoam to fit in the center, and we have to figure out how thick to make it. And we'll go from the top of the ties to the top of the rails. It's going to be pretty thin, and then we'll just cut long thin strips, and then we'll piece it in there. And we have to make sure we leave enough room for the wheels of the engines and the rolling stock to run through here smoothly. Okay, so I've cut all of my strips, and then I just painted them. I painted one side, and you have to paint the edges. Now we're just going to glue them all in place. Now we want to smear the glue kind of evenly on the back. And if you get a little bit of glue on the front, that's okay, because we're going to come back and do some painting after it's all done. Now I'm using a brand new blade and cutting it at a slight angle so that they butt up against each other. Really nice. Now, let me back up a little bit if I can. Maybe. Okay. Now we have a straight piece and our track is curved. Simply go slow and keep bending it. I don't know if you can tell, but it is now has a curve to it. Needs a little bit more. I don't know if it's because of the paint, but it holds the shape. So if you just keep bending it slow, it'll hold that shape. Oh shoot, I forgot to cut the end of it. Okay. I curved that one a little too much. Okay. The center is completely finished now. You know, the great thing about this, I've already ran my engine over both sides to make sure that there was no problems. But if there was, you just take a little bit of sandpaper, and this styrofoam sands so smooth and so nice. And then if there was anything ever on the edge maybe that stuck out, take a really sharp blade and trim it. It's just so easy to work with. All right, I am really happy with this. Now, let's start to glue in all the rest of it. Now, I could paint it all first, but I think it's actually going to be easier to glue it all in place and then paint it. So let's get started on that. I'm going to start in the back section here, and I'm going to do 3 at a time. Now, I considered using Tight Bond, but I've never used Tight Bond on a project like this, so I don't know, but I'm sure it would work. Now you just have to be careful if you get that liquid nails on the rail. You got to make sure you wipe that right away. And then I don't know if I should try to put some on the edge. I'm just putting a little bit on the edge, that way I don't want it to kind of curl up on the edge when I paint it. I don't know if this is necessary, but better safe than sorry. All right, well, this is going to take a little while. This entire section is all glued down, and this represents the new concrete, and then everything that we glue out here will be the old concrete. Now, there's some little gaps right next to the rail, and I'm going to fill those in. And I've got some water. It's kind of dirty, but that's okay. Alright, so all the spackling is done. Now I'll glue in all of our little squares out here. Then we'll let everything dry, and then we can paint it. So in the last episode, I asked all of you whether or not I should keep these wood trestles or get rid of them. And the majority of you said to leave this one on the corner and do away with these. And I gotta tell you, I am completely shocked. I really am. I thought that the majority of people would say leave the wood trestles, which I would have. And I would have stained these, put rock cliffs behind them with trees, and tried to make it look, you know, as good as possible. But the majority of you had said, get rid of them. So that's what I'm doing. And you can see I've already put some styrofoam behind it, just stacked it there temporarily, and put some structures on there to see what it would look like. And I think it's going to look great. We'll have some smaller, maybe N scale flats back here, and then trees. We'll do a whole tree line. So let's real quick take these out. All right, so this will all be a rock cliff, and then that track will be on top of the land. Because we have that rock cliff, I'm actually going to fill in a little bit of this area so that the road doesn't go back so deep into the layout. So I'll just cut some styrofoam, fill a little sliver into the back of this so our road goes right across there. And I don't know yet if that's going to be sitting there or not, but I like the direction this is going. So here is the area that I'm just going to fill in a little corner and put some white styrofoam right in that corner right there, so that our road that comes right through there crosses over the tracks and then continues right through there. Goes through, and there's a bridge. There'll be a bridge right there, and that road will cross over. Now you'll notice from the last video, I switched that building with that building. I just flipped them, because I think this building here looks better with these right here. Well, as you can see, it is all painted gray. And if you're wondering what gray this is, slate gray. Now, I had an entire quart of it mixed at Home Depot. Okay, now what we want to do is take a piece of cardboard, you don't have to press hard, just go over it. Make sure, I should probably, here I'll just round the corners, bend them, so that none of those corners jab into the styrofoam. If you see there's an area where it's like really rough, just take the corner and go over it. That just takes care of any rough, really rough areas. And the only time you'll see it is when you photograph it, or if you run your hand over it, you can feel how textured it is. But just by looking at it, you think, oh, that looks fine. But when you go to photograph it, it may appear a little too rough. Now, we're going to put a wash over this, and then we're going to go heavier on the section out here that is supposed to be older. And we're going to use my favorite chalk paint, Cocoon. Alright, so I've created a wash, and it's just a lot of water and some paint. Now I'm first going to try it in the back. Let me move these. Now, it's hard to tell because it's not going to dry that light. It'll darken. I'm going to add a little bit more water to this. And maybe it's always a little scary when you start painting, but it is just paint. So if we don't like the way it looks, we just put the gray over the top of it and start over. Now some paint is getting on the rail, but we'll take an eraser and go over it. All done. Now you want to be careful not to get it down in that crack. You don't want to paint the ties or the rust that we painted. Now you can see it's already starting to dry, and it's not as light. and you don't see the brush strokes. It sort of blends together. And it's okay if there's imperfections. I don't know if I can zoom in, but it's not real even, and that's what you want. Now I'm going to quick go over the center. It's okay if the center is a little darker, because there'll be a little bit more dirt and grime in the center. And we'll definitely go back with pigments and add oil drips and dirt. Now after this dries, this part that I'm working on right here, we're going to go over it again, but less water and more of the chalk paint, so that this part looks like it's older. All right, hopefully you can tell on camera how this is starting to dry over here. Looking really, really nice. Really like it. Now this is going to take a while to dry because it's anywhere from 98 to 100 degrees outside today, and my air conditioner is running, so it's really cool here in the basement, and so it's going to take a while for this to dry. And I don't want to use a hair dryer on it because it may spread it around and make it real splotchy. So we just want to let it dry naturally. While we're waiting for this to dry, I want to give you a quick tip. When I was mixing my wash, I took my quart and I set it on there. Big no-no, because if this was full, it would be heavy enough where it might leave an indentation in the styrofoam. So you have to be very careful when you're working with styrofoam that you don't dent it or set something heavy on it that leaves a indentation in it. So just be very, very careful of that. So let's check on the progress and see how this is drying. It's still pretty wet. I hope you can see this on camera, but there is a tan color, a brownish color in there, and it ties in really nice with the tans and browns that are in the wall. Now just to show you in comparison, well, there's some aged concrete. So the concrete right here is kind of a tan, almost a yellowish color. And that's what I want in the front section right here. And it'll also match, excuse the big mess, that concrete right there. And we'll be adding a lot of this, a lot of dirt and oil stains, some rust. Now you may be thinking, how do you keep the concrete consistent looking throughout the entire layout? Well, for me, I only use these two colors: chalk paint, Cocoon, and an acrylic paint called Slate Gray. Now, It doesn't matter how you mix them, how much water you add, as long as you're always using the same colors and then weathering it with the same pigments. It's okay if it's off. If one is darker than the other, if one has more gray or one has more of the cocoon, that just adds to the variety and the age of it and how new the concrete is. So, but it's important, I think, to always use the same two colors, whatever those two colors are for you. Well, as you can see, all the painting is done. I painted the old section and went heavier with the cocoon. Now, this part gets a little tedious, but I'm going to carve some cracks. Not a lot, but I'm going to definitely go heavier towards the edge, just around the edge of the concrete where it meets the land. And then probably along here in the old section. I won't go too heavy in the new section of concrete back here, but definitely on the older part. So we're just going to start carving. Now after I finish this, I'll do some light, very light dry brushing. Probably go with a really light gray. And then we'll go in with some pigments and start adding dirt and some grease and tire marks. This is quite the project, and it's all about layers, many layers. I feel like I'm behind schedule with having to wait so long for each layer to dry. So now is the time, if you accidentally put any little dents or marks in the styrofoam, now you can take your knife and add cracks right where those dents are, and it'll kind of camouflage it. So I just placed our structures on there so that I'm not wasting my time putting cracks that are underneath the structures. So now we can start to add more cracks around where the structures are. All right, I'm not going to get too deep into weathering because I know this video is getting kind of long. We're going to use City Dark Dust, Farm Dark Earth, and Winter Soil. And let's work light to dark. So we're going to start with City Dark Dust. Then we'll go to Winter Soil, and last, Farm Dark Earth. Now, Winter Soil. So with each one, you want to go less and less. Now, Farm Dark Earth. This is the darkest. I should probably grab a smaller brush, but just for this demonstration, I'm going to keep using this one. Now you want to be very careful when using this dark one, because if you get too much, it doesn't really wipe off good. But as you can see, it really brings out this. Okay, I think that's starting to really look good. Well, as you can see, it's going to take quite a bit of time to weather all that concrete. Now I do need to take an eraser and go over the top of those rails so that we can start running some trains. All right, well, that's all we have time for today, but we still have a lot of work to do back here. We're going to be weathering a lot of the concrete, adding lots of details. We're going to be adding a large crane right on the edge, either at this end or the other end behind me. And then just like I said, lots of details to make it look like a very, very busy dock scene. So very exciting. This was a little bit stressful just because, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I've never done this before. So it was exciting and nerve-wracking at the same time. But I learned a lot, and hopefully you did too. Well, thank you all so much for watching. And a very special thank you to all of my JJT Patreons. And if you would like to support the channel and get your name on here like these people, please visit patreon.com Jason Jensen Trains. All right, well, until next time, stay motivated and happy modeling, everyone.